welcome to the Political Science Student Association meeting. We're going to be going over the defunding of public education and the DOGE stuff that's happening right now when it comes to public education. So if you guys have any ideas or thoughts on this, please start talking. We also have an attendance sheet that will be going around in just a little bit.
Okay, yeah, for anybody who's a newcomer, we do this every Wednesday at noon. I think everybody here has been to one of these before. And in a few minutes, I'll be passing around the attendance sheet. You can put your name down, that'll verify your attendance, and if you put a faculty name next to yours, we will contact that faculty member to let them know you did attend. Can't guarantee that'll get you any extra credit, but we will verify your attendance. Okay, so who wants to start?
I mean, without
Go ahead.
oh, sorry. I mean, without education, you will have society function. Like, I mean, some jobs need education and to apply for that job, literally.
Okay. Is that let me play devil's advocate and suggest, is that the federal government's job, or should that be left to the states?
I think it should be left to the states.
Okay,
Like, the federal government can promote education.
okay. What about the Department of Education?
Also, it should be for everybody. States also.
I'm not sure what, I mean, the Department of Education as a federal department,
Yes.
is that acceptable?
It is acceptable, yes.
Okay, all right. Others? Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know about like education particularly. I mean, I guess it would suck if they just just butchered the Pell Grant system. I mean, I would personally be very upset by that. But I mean, what the federal government does is, I mean, a lot of the spending that they do on education is like, you know, they can't force states to have like certain curriculums because it's like the state's like, you know, constitutional division to have that. But they can encourage them by giving them money to do stuff, you know what I mean? So there's a lot of disbursements for schools and all that. One of the big ones obviously is like school lunch program, you know, the Department of Education handles, making sure that, you know, that the distribution of that like lunch program, so that I mean, axing it is just another step in like the horrible idea that is the Department of Governmental Efficiency.
So you think it's less efficient to get rid of it than to keep it?
Yeah, it's just, I mean, the Department of Governmental Efficiency actually does the exact opposite, and it makes the government infinitely worse, and like, you know, it makes it more ineffective and more expensive actually, because, you know, they're just ruining everything that was already there.
Now, if I am correct, let's make sure we understand what the Department of Education is all about, the Federal Department of Education. And it is mainly, if I'm correct, and others can please correct me if I'm wrong, it's mainly about providing funding for education, for things like school lunch programs, for what, textbooks, for
The Pell Grant and stuff.
Pell Grants, for making attending schools affordable, attending colleges affordable. So it's mainly about funding. They don't set standards. They may have, I mean, you have to apply for grants and it's not automatic, but they don't set curriculum standards.
It's like a soft power thing where, you know, but you know, if you want to qualify for like this money, you'd have to like hit these check marks so they can kind of softly guide like state curriculums.
Like a block grants, like if they meet like certain quotas,
Yeah.
they get like a block grant.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
It's the same concept as like there are certain laws that are like absolutely universal state laws across every state in the country that they're all the same, not because every state actually agrees, but because the federal government will pull certain fundings if you don't align to that thinking. So it's like, yeah, the Department of Education doesn't actually set policy stuff, but with the funding you can be like, hey, do this, or you won't have the same amount of money. And as for getting rid of them and their efficiency, I don't really that should matter as much as like if you don't have a holistic body that covers the entire country that is in charge of education, which is essentially determining what is right and wrong, then how can you like call yourself a singular country? Like if one region of your country is teaching that this is how things should be and this is how things are and this is what we believe in, and another region of your country is doing something that's vastly different, you're not really the same place. It's kind of like the concept of like human rights being up to the states. It's just as insane. It's like if you think something's a right or if you think something is right or wrong, it should be right or wrong across the entirety of your society, not an arbitrary line between Georgia and Alabama should not decide whether or not you have a human right. And it's the same concept.
Let me play devil's advocate again and ask whether or not there should be any variances among the states. Should there be variances in, say, curriculum or whatever the structure of educational facilities, or again curriculum, between, say, large urban areas and more rural areas?
I think you can absolutely have variations. It's just how great should those variations be allowed to be?
Yeah, like I'm agreeing with him. Like, you know, if you have like an agricultural school, like, yeah, well, that's what I said. But like if you have a rural that has more agricultural stuff, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like that makes sense. You know, you don't need like necessarily like to provide like that kind of core stuff for, you know, like an inner city, but like for the basic facts of history, maybe that one should be a universal, like, yeah, the Civil War is about slavery, you're not getting out of that one. The South, like, we're gonna force you to like write it how it happened.
I think a really good example of this would be like in a lot of Georgia schools, you learn about what was his name, Oglethorpe, who was the founder of the colony of Georgia. You don't really need to know all that much about him if you're not living in Georgia. But if Georgia wants to talk about the guy who founded Georgia, who cares? Like, that's fine.
Or when you just visit, you want to visit and want to learn some history of Georgia. That's
if you're visiting, you're not going to school there.
Maybe they should learn some history, you know.
Well, then you can go visit the like national park he has in Oglethorpe, Georgia.
Okay. All right.
I think it's good for there to be like some variation, but I feel like things like across the board, like meeting like history, math, like certain credentials like they need to be able to meet. Whereas like I know Florida during like certain grades they have like, you know how we have like different drills, like we'll have like a fire drill and stuff. They have like alligator where they like teach kids how to like avoid alligators, which is probably not needed in most other states. Things like that is like good. Even things like agricultural, I think that would be like good if it translated even into the city, because well they're not going to be doing their own farming, but to at least know the process of what it takes to like grow a plant. I think it's general knowledge. That's good.
That reminds me of the saying about alligators, that if you and I are being chased by an alligator, I don't need to outrun the alligator, I just need to outrun you. So, is there a consensus here? Is there a use for a federal Department of Education? Yeah.
I think there is, especially when we consider like college application on people that are, you know, in pursuit of a higher degree. I think it's really weird that like, you know, state by state it's understandable that there will be small differences, but even within the state, I think it's helpful that everyone comes into college with the same level of knowledge. I feel like that isn't necessarily the case. Like maybe you could say like an American government class, the whole reason why we have that is because maybe everybody didn't get the basics while they were in high school. Granted, I think it's a little more in-depth than it would be, but I feel like it's important. But also when it comes to these like specialties, I think private schools can like remain the way that they are, or we have like STEM schools or art schools, and they're very specific, and if that's what parents want their children to do, I think they should totally be allowed to do that. But I don't know, the private school, public school thing is kind of difficult because you're not going to get private schools to implement everything that public schools are, even if we maybe want them to, so it can be more uniform.
Well, that gets back to what we were discussing before about the idea of federal funding. It may only be funding, but they can establish rules for how you qualify for funding, that you might have to have certain curriculum available, whereas private schools, if they don't take federal funding, and even some private schools are eligible for some grants in certain situations, but in general, if you don't take federal funding, then you don't have to follow federal guidelines.
And I think that can get kind of like dangerous depending on what the federal government is asking us to put into schools. Like, for example, as far as like keeping religion in or out of schools, I think you either have to go full force with it and teach about every religion that you possibly can, or just not do it at all. And I think a lot of people aren't really willing to accept that yet, but that's just me.
Okay, yeah.
And I mean, on the religion topic, that is how private schools got so big in the South. I mean, that and desegregation. But those were the two big factors that created an explosion of private schools across the Southeast, because people were like, oh, I don't like this. I'm going to go to private school where I can be racist and talk about how Christianity is right and all the other religions are completely wrong.
Now, for several decades now, it has been a goal among some on the right to eliminate two federal departments, the Department of Energy and the Department of Education. Is there a case to be made for eliminating the Department of Education? I mean, we've talked about how it could be valuable and it could provide funding, but is there another way to achieve the same goals? Go ahead, you have the wow, then we'll go.
Well, they want to axe it because they don't want those goals. You know, like they fundamentally, you know, like it's they want to starve the public sector. They want to you know, they want to destroy it as much as they can. It's not necessarily about what will we lose or anything like that. It's like ideologically, I do not think this should exist. Period. I think the government should be like as like muted and like you know, just as weak as humanly possible. So I mean, they don't really have like an answer for like, oh, we could do it like in a more efficient way. Like they just don't want it. Period. They don't want that.
Okay.
I think, I don't know if eradicating the whole thing is the right answer. I think some heavy reforms would be more ideal. But I feel like I was talking to someone in one of my other meetings, and they unfortunately lost their job because of the funding that's being cut off. And they were part of an organization that took kids to DC and the Capitol and educated them. It sounded like an awesome program. Nobody wants that to get shut down. Those are like our future politicians, hopefully. But when we have 7th graders that are reading at like a 2nd grade level, when those people become parents and they can't read the permission slip and sign it to send their kids to the program, I think we have a bigger problem on our hands.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Well, this kind of gets into like the day-to-day functioning of schools is a state issue. You know, it's the federal program is mainly like you know, it's the main things that you usually see are getting like food on table. I think the Common Core stuff is federal, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So like they have some of these standards and all that, but day-to-day operations about like literacy rates, it's really up to like how much you know, like, you know, because most of it's based on property taxes in states. Poor districts don't have as much property taxes, so they're, you know, obviously their schools are going to be much worse, and the state isn't gonna, well, usually these are like inner city schools and, you know, like rural, like way off in the periphery schools that are just, you know, there's no money to like raise locally, and states aren't willing to like invest in them. So I mean, it's really a state problem too. And I think the federal government could theoretically be the institution that comes in and says, well, we're actually going to give you like this amount of money to like, you know, overreach the state and allow these like areas that the state wouldn't usually care about, but the federal government could actually, you know, broadly like target all of those
Okay,
underfunded
so correct,
schools.
we'll go to Anita in just a second. Correct me if I'm wrong, please do, but so part of what you're suggesting then is that the poorest, for lack of a better word, the poorest school districts are the ones that need this the most. That wealthy school districts might be able to get along without federal funding, without anything from the Department of Education, although there may even be benefits there.
Yeah.
But it's the poorest school districts.
Yeah, it's the poorest schools that have the most to lose because, I mean, federal funding is, for some of them, it's like the only thing that keeps the lights on.
Okay. Yeah.
At least when it comes to like education variancy, part of the problem comes from federal funding because to meet like they have to meet certain quotas to receive federal funding. So then you have places lowering the standard of what kids have to meet to pass. So you have people in like the 9th grade that can't read well and they're still getting passed on because if they don't pass that student, now their funding is getting taken away and now the school can't operate and function correctly. So there's like drawbacks to both. But there are like different programs too in like low income areas. So at least I know for Lincoln, for low income areas in the summertime, the Literary Society partners with the Community Helping Place and they do well fed, well read. So they bring what would be like school lunches or like meal stuff, and then they have a bus that has like a bunch of school books that kids can go through and pick up as many books as they can. So there are different things like library programs and stuff, but it's definitely an issue in lower income neighborhoods. Sorry, my brain kind of.
Okay, yeah.
I think that there are absolutely like legitimate concerns that are why there are so many people on the side of changing the Department of Education or even getting rid of it, because literacy rates are falling and all sorts of young Americans are struggling with education. But destroying the Department of Education on a federal level and just being like, yeah, the states can do whatever they want, doesn't fix any of those problems. And honestly, neither does just more funding. I think it's a much deeper rooted issue than that comes from we just don't value education and we don't inspire people to want to learn more in the same way that other places do. And like, I don't know if there's like a super positive way to do that, because all the places with like the absolute best education, they do it via force. Like if you're not really, really smart, your prospects are much worse and people view you much more terribly. They have great education, people learn a lot, but they do it by force. So I don't really know if there's like an easy solution to that. I mean, more funding would certainly help, and like better programs would certainly help, but I think you just need to find a way to get more people to want to learn things.
Okay, time.
You can go, yeah, Mr.
I was just gonna agree on like how I feel like a lot of people have forgotten that like education is a privilege. It's not just like it's everything has just like de-escalated throughout the years. Like I feel like people like the standard of education has just lowered. Like, you know, like years ago only the rich people who went or got an education were allowed to have a voice and an opinion. I feel like now these days like anybody can have an opinion, which is good and like nice in a way, but at the same time I feel like just about anybody's allowed to say anything and do anything these days, and there's not really like a standard.
Okay, others?
Well, part of like what you were talking about, where like there's, it comes back to the not wanting to spend money on this. You know what I mean? Like there's an appetite for all of the privileges of spending, government public spending, but none of the, you know, we actually have to like raise taxes and do that. Like it turns out money doesn't just come out of nowhere. You actually have to like, you know, raise funds to be able to have all these nice things. And you know, when you're talking about like, you know, oh, they don't meet these standards, so like they get their funding cut, you know what I mean? It comes from that like philosophy of like, oh, well, this school like sucks, so like, you know, we're not going to give them like this money that could be better served for a school that is like educating teachers, or like, you know, educating students. So, and you know, which is backwards of how it should be. It's like, well, clearly this is underperforming. We need to give them more money so that they actually like are able to like get up to the standards of everyone else. But, you know, it kind of gets into that like, I guess like chosen one kind of thing where it's like, well, we'll helicopter a few like select like people that are like worthy of like this like extra, you know, education. You know what I mean? It's like for like, you know, you see these honors programs, they kind of like helicopter them out, you know, and be like, oh, like a school voucher, you know, you're smart enough, you can escape, and like we're gonna leave everyone else like to languish. You know, there's not, but like really it would be better to spend the money like improving the school holistically and not like just, selecting like a few people to like try and maximize the amount of like, money per like result you get. There needs to just be more of an appetite for, hey, let's just spend to like raise the bar instead of, hand picking a few people out to like make it.
Now, the thought occurs to me, I mean, we're talking about, there's been a lot of talk about the decline of students, the decline of education. And I don't know of any specific studies. I know people have suggested that our students are not as competitive anymore as they once were, et cetera, et cetera. But I wonder, and I wonder if anybody knows about this, I wonder if that's not an artifact of exactly what you were talking about before, that the universe of people who are getting an education, who are getting into college, for example, has expanded, which is to say more people are attending some form of college now than, say, 60, 70 years ago. And it's partly because we also talked about the idea that the poorest districts, well, the ones that need the funding the most, so that if we are extending if we're extending access to higher education to more and more places in the country, and that mainly means poorer and poorer places that never had access before, then maybe all of these studies about student achievement would make sense, because we're reaching people who have never had that opportunity before. So that it's not necessarily, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but that it's not necessarily the fault of the education system that standardized test results, et cetera, are going down. In fact, that in a perverse way, that might be an indication that we are reaching more and more people who have not had the opportunity, who grew up and whose parents grew up without the opportunity of an education. And there is a difference between an educated family and an uneducated family. Children of an educated family are going to do much better in school regardless than children of a family that hasn't had the benefit of education. So I wonder if it's not the best measure of performance of the Department of Education or of funding or of whatever we want to look at whether or not test scores are going up or down. Is that, am I completely off base, or is there some logic to that? What do you think?
Yeah, I think there's absolutely something to say for like, yeah, the numbers are down in the absolutes, but that's because we're teaching more people than ever. But at the same time, like, we may be teaching more people than ever, but the educational middle class is not what it once was, I think, and that's the real problem. Whereas, like, I think if people that really want to learn, and also people that get the money and are from the background where that's prioritized, are going to be just as educated and just as smart as they had been in decades past, and the people where the exact opposite is true also will be just as uneducated. But like, what that middle ground looks like is what's really concerning, because I think there was definitely a point in time where if you were somebody who either wasn't super interested in education or didn't get the best amount of money thrown towards their education, had some of the factors but not others, you were right in the middle there. There was a baseline you had, like there were certain things you knew and you were well read on certain things. Whereas now, I don't think that's true as much. Like, you ask, like, there was a recent survey that came out, like, asking Americans about, like, their favorite novel, and the answers were kind of scary compared to the past. I mean, it was people in their 30s and 40s talking about how the only novels they'd ever read were, like, YA novels, and, like, sure, there's cool fiction books out there, but, like, 20 years ago, people were talking about Charles Dickens, or, I mean, he's not like some high bar of entry reader. Like, you can read Charles Dickens, it's not that hard. It's not Kant or something, but even that is gone. So I think that middle class range is what's really concerning.
So what do we do about this? I know that's a big question to ask, but
I think it comes back to I think more funding does absolutely help. Just sometimes there is something to be said for throwing money at a problem. Money does kind of fix everything, which sucks, but is true. I think prioritizing wanting to learn more than prioritizing like memorization is important. And then finally, I think just culturally as Americans being more invested in more intellectual pursuits, which is very hard, but
I think building off of that, I mean, there is definitely a culture that kind of looks down like just on academia. I mean, this isn't even just like the people who just like don't like science because it like contrary to their worldview or whatever, but like, you know, there's like the deriding remarks like those who can't teach, you know, like the teaching is like seen as like like you failed at everything else in life, you're going back here, you know what I mean, like this is your fallback line. And you know, if teaching were considered more of like a profession, you know, like along with like a lawyer or a doctor or whatever, and it were considered like a more like noble pursuit to like go and actually teach like the nation's young, I think that would go a long way into like reestablishing that kind of like culture of like, hey, learning and education are like important things and are like actually keystones of like a educated civil society.
At least when it came to like teaching, I've always, at least from being around like how I grew up and stuff, teachers were always considered noble, but in the way of like they were doing that almost as like a charity. Like they knew that they were going to go into it with the pursuit of trying to help further children's education, knowing that they are not going to get much out of it.
noble in the same way a nun is noble.
Yeah.
so it seems to me that the profession. I mean, my first thought with what you were saying is, okay, it's great that we ought to make it something that's desirable again, but how do you do that? And I think we're seeing, as with everything else in life, a political division on education, where one side suggests that teaching is a noble profession and it's something that we should aspire to do and teachers should be considered special, et cetera, et cetera. And the other side says it's indoctrination. And it's simply trying to politicize people. So is it possible to move beyond that? And again, if we want to get people to think that learning is a cool thing, how do we do that? And again, I know that's a big question.
So, yeah, the first thing that I find really interesting is that there is absolutely a group of people where it's like, oh, learning is just indoctrination. But those people that say that are, like the leaders of those people at least, are all incredibly well read. Like they don't actually believe that. It's just what they're selling because they know who their audience is. For the class that multiple of us in this room have right after this, Dr. Montagano, the back of our copy of The New Atlantis has like a recommendation from Peter Thiel. I mean, that's like one of the leaders, one of the billionaire conservative leaders. He loves the book. He loves this stuff. So it's not that they actually, I don't think a lot of them actually believe that. It's just what they're selling. And as for like making it cool again, I think, honestly, I think paying teachers more helps a lot. Because when he brought up how it's, or when they both brought up how it's like noble in a kind, not a bad way, but like in a sacrificial way, or like how people are like, oh, you went back to teaching because you couldn't do other stuff and, you know, it doesn't make as much. And I think we're so bought into that, like, money equals value mindset when it comes to professions, that just paying teachers more would just make it more valuable in students' minds, in everyone's minds, regardless of, like, any tangible effects.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and the last thing I wanted to say about it was that, like, it's almost subconscious at this point, because I was talking after class with Dr. Montagano on Monday about how somebody was talking with us and they asked what I wanted to do, and I was like, oh, I'm going to be a lawyer. And they're like, really? I thought, you know, the way you talk in class sometimes, I thought you would like want to teach this stuff too. And I was like, well, that's like my backup plan because I want to make some money. And as I said that, I was like, that's not right. But also at the same time, it's just kind of the reality. So.
Okay, what I was going to say is there is a and this is something that I do know about, there is all sorts of evidence that a college education will make you a lot more money over a lifetime. Every study has shown that with a college education, you will earn somewhere over $1 million more over a lifetime than those without college education. But even if that weren't the case, my pitch for college education is that it gives you flexibility. It gives you a chance to explore political philosophy and STEM and all sorts of other things, so that you're not locked in to any one particular career path, or so that you have options, and so wherever you go, you have some experience. Okay, yeah, I know about this, I learned a little about this and a little about that. Gives you more flexibility over your lifetime. Yeah.
I totally agree. I do think there are some people though that maybe, I mean, I'm from Florida, so maybe that's more the case there. You also need to be way smarter about your scholarships and stuff here. But there are a lot of people that go to college, you know, because they feel like they have to, or for that reason, they think it's going to give them more option later on. And for the people that maybe don't plan it right, it can put them in like a tough situation where they're still not finding the job and they still don't, and they're not making any money to pay off the debt that they just put themselves in. But the majority of the time, I would agree, yeah, it definitely gives
Yeah,
them
and
options.
actually, I would add that yes, there should be alternatives. There are people who are just not cut out, and alternatives, technical schools and the like, and other kinds of experiences can provide another pathway for somebody who might not be getting the best benefit out of a college education. But I agree with you in that I think for most of us, the flexibility and the increased knowledge makes a college education very worthwhile, and we should focus on making it as affordable as possible. I can throw out some numbers here comparing to what you guys have to go through to what I have to go through that will just completely blow you away in terms of affordability. I mean, you know, we hear about students today going into debt for tens of thousands of dollars, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars, and that can put someone in debt for the rest of their life, or a good portion of the rest of their life. Okay? I graduated 4 years from a pretty good college in part of the New York State University system, very similar to North Georgia. And I wound up with a $1,000 loan. That's it. Okay. I got graduate education, a PhD, and my total debt was $5,000. Our tuition was $500 a semester. Okay. Now, granted, you can maybe do the calculations. This was, you know, a couple of centuries ago, back in the 1980s, and so inflation might mean those numbers are a little bit bigger now, but not 10,000, not 100,000, not 50,000. You know, my total educational debt was $6,000. That's it, undergraduate and graduate education. Today, that might be 10, 12, maybe even 15,000 total. Okay, very different. Now, some of the things that have increased costs, I think, are worthwhile. Student counseling, for example, that's something we had very little of in college. I remember they introduced a counselor to us as a college with 5,000 students. They had one person that was obviously just fresh out of grad school, and I don't know, but was probably almost certainly overwhelmed, and probably wasn't paid very well either. We have much better facilities for students here. They may or may not be good enough. I don't know if any of you have any views on that, but I guarantee they're better than what we had. There are all sorts of other things in terms of facilities, in terms of technology, in terms of being able to adapt to emerging technology. Now, when I was in college, we didn't have, computer meant something very different from what we have today, and nobody had cell phones or anything like that. We had some technology, but that was really just open to very few people. You know, you had to be a computer science major to have access to any computers whatsoever, and even that was sort of time-shared kind of thing. And so there are things that you are getting that might be worth some of that extra money. But the idea of $50,000 or $100,000 is just crazy. And I know, Neve, you were waiting, so sorry.
It was back, like a previous thing. I'm trying to remember. Part of it had to do with, I know I was thinking about the education when you were talking about funding teachers more. I think even if it's not like higher paid, just having more teachers, like having 2 teachers to a classroom could help so much, because some teachers will have like 30 kids, 1 teacher, and they're overwhelmed. I've worked with like daycare and stuff before where I've been alone for like 20 minutes with like 10 5-year-olds, and I'm like dead by the time they get back, because they're everywhere all at once, all moving, and loud. But like even at like a high school level, when there's just 1 teacher and so many kids, like how can you like keep up with them, make sure every single person is getting the education that they need? There needs to be more aides, there needs to be more teachers just in general, and part of it is applying more funding for more teachers, but also having more teachers would mean that they would hopefully get paid better too. So I think that this is just really important. And I finally remember what else I was going to mention, sorry. At least I know for Georgia, federal funding is really important, because and state funding, because I know a lot of people have like Hope, Cell, Pell Grant. If you go about it the right way, you can get through college with a lot less debt than hopefully, at least depending on like income basis. Like most of my college is covered because I have Hope and Pell and a couple other grants and scholarships. But it takes a lot to get to those, and like a lot of paperwork, and sometimes people aren't always taught that. So the only reason why I knew how to like apply for everything was because my second cousin's mom had recently had to go through that with her kid, and then she was like, oh yeah, you need to do like all of these things, or like close to the due dates on this stuff. And I was like, I didn't know that there was due dates, nobody told me. And just having that like education available where they know where to apply, I think would be incredibly important.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think we also have an issue, I don't know if it's an issue in Georgia, I know it was in Florida, where you have students whose parents are maybe like middle class, maybe upper middle class, and they're like, well, I paid for my own college back when it was not this expensive, so how about you go pay for your own college? So then you go and you apply and you put your family as upper middle class, and they give you absolutely zero money because they assume that your parents are helping you when they're not. So that's a big issue. But also I think the education of the educators, like we're sitting in, I believe, like the best school in the state for our elementary education program. All of my friends are education majors, and like they're experiencing a lot of the same issues of just not having enough people. Like we've talked about the money, how we need to pay teachers more. I think, yes, that's a great motivation, and I would personally need way more than that to deal with that many children that aren't reading at the level that they should be reading at, or behaving the way they should be behaving, because they all have phones. But I think if we can focus on having more educators more in the classroom, I think it's a mix of paying them a little bit more as well as just giving them more help. They need help more than they need money. Look, they all need money, but you know.
But people don't want to pay taxes, right?
Yeah.
And by the way, when I say people don't want to pay taxes, getting back to what you were suggesting before, and I'm sorry, we'll get to it. When you talk about people who say, well, I've paid for my entire education myself, I didn't need any help, so you should be able to do that. Even those people are getting help. Because and there's another number that I do know. The average contribution towards your education nationwide is about 42%. So those people who claim, in other words, that's tax dollars, okay? Those people who claim, oh, I'm paying 100% of my own education, they're paying about 60%. The other 40% or more is being provided by taxpayers. Okay? So everybody's getting help.
Yeah. Well, I was just gonna agree with you guys about like how we do need more teachers and like more teachers in classrooms and teachers need help. But in general, we just need more teachers. Like I feel like the whole country as a whole just lacks in educators these days. Like I know in my school, like some days we, like when a teacher would call out, we didn't even have enough teachers or substitute teachers for someone to cover the class, and like one of our cafeteria ladies or someone had to cover for the class. It's just, I feel like there's just not enough educators because of the slander of their name and stuff.
Okay, first you.
I was thinking teachers definitely do not make enough money, and if you want to improve the education of society, like how else are you supposed to attract brilliance to that job if in a capitalist society without paying them more? If it's not an attractive prospect to people, how are you going to get more teachers? And then I have a friend who is 2 years older than me. He went to college at Kennesaw and then GGC to become a music education major. He wanted to teach he wanted to teach like chamber music, orchestra in public school, and he struggled he struggled in college because he said himself that he just doesn't think that he was made to be a student. But he also said that after he was also disillusioned by it because after he graduated, he wouldn't be making any more money than he does now working as a maintenance worker on a golf course. So he has, what motivation does he have to finish and spend all that money to go through college and to become to teach music if he's not going to make any more money? And that's what kind of, that and other things is what kind of just got to his head and made him drop out of college. And that's what I think of when I think about teachers.
Yeah, I mean, I really like want to hammer down like on that is like, you're not going to get people going to college to like fill up the slots if there is no like prospect in becoming a teacher. Because everyone's going to go to, you're like, well, I'm going to have to pay this off. This has to be in like an investment that's actually going to work for me. So like, if you're going to education and it's like, oh, well, there's like, the government's opened up all these new programs for new teachers. It's like, well, you're still getting paid like garbage. So like, you're not taking that. You know what I mean? It's like, why are people like, oh yeah, lawyer, doctor? It's like money. You know what I mean? Like, that's why they do it. That's why does it become an engineering? You know what I mean? It's like they presume like, oh, maybe I can get like Lockheed Martin deal and like make money. You know what I mean? So if there is no like monetary incentive, everything else is going to fall on its face. You're not going to get more people into the industry, into the field, if you don't pay them to be there.
I think also with it both being so low funding, but also some of the stuff that they have to deal with, especially now. I don't know if there's like a percentage rate in like studies for like children, but I feel like it was at least somewhat different when I was growing up because like at least some of the stories I've heard, like you have teachers that are like they're being choked out by students, they're having things thrown at them, chairs thrown at them, they're having to deal with a lot more violent threats from kids. I know of like a teacher that she basically quit her job when she got pregnant because she was getting threats that it was gonna like kick her stomach and stuff, and she just couldn't take that. And that's at least when I was growing up. Now I was in a different type of program, but like if I had ever made a threat to someone, I would have fear of God put into me by my mom. I don't know what's different. I don't know what's different now with kids, but I've seen like a difference even like from babysitting and stuff. Some of the like newer age children, they don't have like the reverence towards elders and towards specifically teachers than they used to, I feel like.
I feel like to your point, that kind of goes with like the parenting lately, especially like I feel like, I don't know, maybe technology or just a lack of responsibility from like parents, it just seems that like a lot of children aren't being educated on how to respect, you know, their elders and their teachers, and I feel like there's this kind of like shift, and I don't know if it's political, like maybe parents like believe like, oh well, the teachers like they're just gonna indoctrinate you, just don't listen to what they say. Then you go into class and you don't listen to them, and it just seems like there's like a disconnect.
Well, I mean, this also comes back around to payment. I mean, like, if you're being faced with these like discipline issues, right? I mean, like, are you gonna like invest the time? You know, if you're getting paid like horribly, are you like, how much more likely are you to like invest the time into like, you know, being the one that like steps up and like actually like, you know, provides like a positive like role model example to like inspire the children to like actually like care for themselves, you know? Like, if you're not getting paid that much, it's much more easier to say, I give up, and like, you know, kind of like, you know, just try and like well, I just have to make it through the day, and then like they're out of my hair, and I don't have to like, you know, deal with these children anymore. You know what I mean? You know, if you invest in them and you like make it like a profession, they're going to be a little more dedicated to like maybe like rooting, like, you know, I'm not saying like they have all the powers. Obviously, they can't like discipline them like a parent can, but you know, be more have like more energy to deal with this, and like, you know, invest themselves into trying to be a more positive role model for these children, to like, you know, inspire them to be better. But you know, if they don't get paid that much, you know, it's like there's not really much incentive for them to go above and beyond in their job and like do that.
Fred, you spoke, and then we'll go to you.
Okay, I think, so funding is, I agree, the absolute number one issue, but I think after that there's something to be said for people, like, there are ways you can make people more interested in education that don't involve like money or things that you can't really control. And I think there's something to be said for people find things valuable that they enjoy. And if you can just change up how teaching is done to make more people feel invested or like to be inspired by it. Again, there's something, it's less memorization, more about, you know, knowing things, the joy of understanding things. And like nobody finds a role model or nobody finds a teacher they like because they just found that person like interesting or like inspiring. They found it because that person made what they were trying to tell them fun. It made it feel worthwhile in some way. Maybe fun is the wrong word, but it made it feel like they were earning something really useful or something that they really felt they needed to know, and that's why they latched onto that person. So if you can just, you know, if you can make education more about being involved and more about, you know, talking to each other and more about learning things and less about just memorization, I think there is something to be said for that, and it can have more people be more invested in it.
Okay, so Donna, last word.
I really hated like hearing it from our parents, but I swear it really is the phones. Like, it has to be. I just don't understand why people think it's okay to give their like 8-year-old a phone. And the stuff like for personal safety, like safety issues aside, we know there's disgusting people out there. It just makes no sense that you're gonna get off of your school at 8 years old and go home and go to your room and spend the rest of your day on your phone or today, whatever. And we don't think about it that much, but say even Disney shows, Nickelodeon shows, the way to keep kids interested in that is to like portray things they're gonna be interested in. So like a student rebelling against a teacher is a pretty common plot in like every Disney show ever. And then we're just gonna put that in front of these kids and expect them to not translate it to the classroom. It makes no sense.
All right, on that note, do we want to close that? Do we have a topic for next week?
Yes, so next week we're going to be doing gun control, and then actually I think one of the members from the Republicans and one member from the Democrats are going to talk a little bit about their meeting because they're having a lawyer come and talk about the Second Amendment. That's actually going to be after this meeting. So that's going to be our...
And time change for it. It's at 1 now instead of 1:30 in case you saw when it's at 1:30.
Okay, then that would be at 1. So we're going to be talking about gun control, and yeah, thank you.
All right, see you all next week. Bring friends.
Oh, I need the rest of this one or ours?
I do not know. Which room did you guys come from?
I'm sorry? Oh, everything goes in here.